Welcome back, Nerglings. Today we are looking at my Grail Pilgrims and/or Peasants. But before we start, be sure to like, share and subscribe so you don't miss an update. Right, Grail Pilgrims, a fancy term for what otherwise might be considered peasants. Indeed, many of those either desperate, greedy or mentally ill enough to drop everything and go willingly into the hands of God would be considered peasants in any other guise. The First Crusade was mostly made up of these multitudes, led by Peter the Hermit. Albert of Eye claimed that Peter the Hermit was the true author and originator of the First Crusade. This story later appears in the pages of William Tyre, which indicates that even a few generations after the Crusade, the descendants of the Crusaders believed Peter was its originator. This myth was dismissed by modern historians, beginning with Heinrich von Sybel. Various historical sources also recount that during an early visit to Jerusalem, sometime before 1096, Jesus appeared to Peter the Hermit in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and bade him preach the crusade. The origins of these legends are a matter of some interest. Von Sybel suggested that in the camp of the paupers, which existed side by side with that of the knights, and grew increasingly large as the crusade took a more and more heavy toll on the purses of the crusaders, some idolization of Peter the Hermit had already begun, parallel to the similar glorification of Godfrey of Bouillon by the Lorrainiers. Interestingly, whilst Peter is called Blessed Peter the Hermit by some, he was never beatified into the Catholic Church, in that his entrance to heaven was never recognized, and thus never giving him the capacity to intercede on behalf of individuals who pray in his name, i.e., the first step on the road to sainthood. Right, enough of that historical gumph. You want to learn about filthy Bretonnians. Whilst worship of the lady is centred on the nobility, the peasants do not ignore her. It is true that most peasants give their primary devotion to the other deities of the old world. A few peasants, however, are as devoted to the Lady of the Lake as any Grail Knight. As these peasants cannot become Grail Knights or damsels themselves, they try to be as close as possible to those who have. Damsels of the Lady are more feared than loved by most peasants, and most would drive off any who started following them around. So the vast majority of these peasants join the entourage of a Grail Knight. Such people are known as Grail Pilgrims. A Grail Pilgrim, as long as he follows his Grail Knight, accepting the hardships of life on the road, is deemed to be on pilgrimage, and thus cannot be seized by his lord. Few join purely for this independence, however, as Grail Knights seek out dangerous places, and the life expectancy of Grail Pilgrims is not long. Driven by relentless obsession, these pilgrims collect almost anything that a Grail Knight casts aside, whether it be a scrap of ruined armour, clothing, or even discarded food. Such is their burning passion. These religious scavengers will follow their idol through all weathers and lands, exulting in his acts and praising his sparing words. The knights bear these followers with a dutiful resignation that borders on the stoic, though they endeavour not to encourage their self-appointed apostles. This is a vain hope, for even the merest word or gesture is seized upon as an act of great import, and eagerly immortalised in tales and discordant song. If a Grail Knight is unfortunate enough to fall in battle, his devoted followers will swarm over his corpse, picking it clean of anything that could bear the blessing of the lady. It has been known for these desperate peasants to mistake gravely wounded knights for dead. Indeed, it does not stretch credibility to believe that more than a few Grail Knights could well have met their demise as a result of being crushed by scavenging pilgrims. To such a zealot, the most prized of all the possessions of a Grail Knight is his body itself. In fact, many bands of pilgrims cart around a reliquary wherever they go, with the corpse of a departed knight resting at its centre. The outside of the relique is a gaudy melange, adorned with trinkets gathered from many Grail Knights from across all corners of Bretonnia. The pilgrims devote themselves to this construction, supplicating themselves before it as if it were a living Grail Knight, praying for its blessings. To the pilgrims, the relique is the ultimate icon of their devotion to both the Lady of the Lake and her knights. Mobile shrines from which the chosen amongst them can preach their creed. There is never a shortage of listeners for these demagogues, for at each town or village the common people will flock to the reliques so that they might hear graphic detail, the latest tales and deeds of the heroic knight who unintentionally leads the procession. These gatherings can often turn ugly, the fanatical zeal of the pilgrims exploding into violence that the local militias can have difficulty containing. Such outbreaks are always short-lived, subsiding instantly at the command of a Grail Knight, the pilgrims collapsing into rapture at the thought of actually having been noticed by their idol. Often, peasants in the crowd will choose to join the ragtag band of pilgrims, drawn by promises of salvation and the blessing of the lady. Others are drafted into the ranks through threats and near blackmail, generously being offered an opportunity to earn the redemption of the lady for crimes and misdeeds that are sometimes real, but more usually invented by the fanatical preachers who are ever eager to expand their flock through any means. Battle pilgrims are the fanatical worshippers of the knights from which they derive their namesake. They are furious warriors, utterly dedicated to their patrons. A ramshackle band of zealots, Grail pilgrims make up for what they lack in skill with fury and righteous fire. Grail pilgrims are looked on with a mixture of contempt and fear by the normal folk of Bretonnia. The peasantry of the kingdom all agree Grail Knights are awe-inspiring figures, and so understand how easy it might be to idolize them in this manner. On the other hand, Grail pilgrims are notoriously zealous and dangerous, and have been known to raid villages and farmsteads when foraging for supplies. The Bretonnian nobility view them as pests in peacetime. Some dukes may see wandering bands of pilgrims on their lands imprisoned or killed. In times of war, this attitude changes, for the fanatical pilgrim bands make doughty fighters, and their presence on a battlefield is viewed as a boon. Now, most of the miniatures I'll be using for my Grail pilgrims and peasants have been sourced from Footsore, Gripping Beast and Old Glory, so they are quite an eclectic mix of sculpts. The scales are not quite the same, although they look pretty okay when ranked up together and used throughout the units. They certainly don't completely overwhelm each other like most newer Games Workshop miniatures. I'll be using this mass of troops to hopefully soak up some of the errant bolts and ranged attacks from the enemy, in that there should be so many in each unit that they shouldn't be overly fazed by the loss of several of their comrades. Each unit will have a command to give them a bit of a boost, and the roaming Templar Knight will be on hand to deal with any blasphemies such as desertion, enemy characters, or otherwise unexpected behaviour. In summary, the Grail Pilgrims certainly aren't as robust of body and spirit as their battle pilgrim brothers in arms. However, given enough of them, they should be a good addition to the army. About 100 should do. With that in mind, thank you very much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out some more in the series. Au revoir, mon ami.